Hi everyone, I am recording a video lecture on revision for the classical argument draft, and everybody has feedback on their draft, and you should be able to see it as if you were going to um, submit the actual assignment. You'll see in-text feedback from myself as I've provided in the past. So a student has provided their classical argument draft as something that I'm going to kind of show revision and process and how I look at the drafts as I'm providing feedback. And then, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through it as I would anybody else's and provide feedback. And I may even do a little bit more than what I do in feedback because I'm going to be also using what's called track changes. So this is going to show all of the changes that I'm making within the draft itself. But before I use the track changes, I'm going to polish up the APA just a little bit. So, and I'm going to make this larger so that everybody can see. So the first thing is in APA, right, we have the cover page. So you want to make sure that your classical draft, the final one that you submit, is in APA format. And the first thing, this looks pretty good. The first thing I'm noticing is this up here. You can see that the page number is not in line with the rest of the running head. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to redo the headers for APA, and also that will, for this paper, and then that will also help anyone who's been struggling with the running head. I know I provided this in a previous video lecture, but trust me, it never hurts to look at something or have a tutorial of something multiple times. So I'm going to go ahead and double click that, right, to get into the header area of the document. I'm just going to select everything and delete it. And I'm going to go back to home here. But, well, actually, I'm going to go to header and footer, which has opened up for me on the ribbon in Microsoft Word. And I'm going to add that page number. And then, and again, like in the other APA video lecture that I provided, this is being done on my Mac. It's just slightly different than you would do it on a PC, but it's relatively the same. You never enter a header. You always enter a page number. And the main difference between the page number in PC is that it will give you page number options, and you want to select the plain number 3, and that automatically puts the page number on the right side of the header. So I'm then going to manually justify this to the right side of the paper. And then I also need to change the font because, as I stated before, even if you change the font in the body of your document, it doesn't change the font in the header portion of it. So I have everything selected. I'm going to make sure it's Times New Roman. And then I'm going to make sure it's already at size 12, which is what we want. And then I'm going to add that running head. And that's how you write the running head. Only the R gets capitalized, and then there's a colon, and then there's a space, and then you put the title. Well, before I do this, because this is what happened in the other document, is I have to select different first page. That's the one that I always do the header, and then I forget that I have to select different first page. So selecting the different first page option tells Word that I have one page of my header that I want to look different from the rest. So then I'm going to just reinsert that page number, justify it again to the left, make sure my font, because the font did not stick, Times New Roman, and then I will enter the running head. And then I will capitalize the title, which is Benefits of Physical Education We'll see if this all fits. It doesn't fit, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave that as the title, and then I'm going to do the space bar, and I'm going to space it all the way to the margin so that the running head here is in line with the the left margin and you want to space it until the number drops down, and then you do backspace or delete, and then it brings it back up, and then you have the header for the first page, and then we'll do the header for the rest of the pages. And for the rest of the pages, we only want the title. So the running head only the whole thing is called the running header, but you actually write the word running head on the cover page. I don't know why, that's just an APA rule. I don't have any logical explanation for it. But on the rest of the document, you just have the title. So then we'll rewrite that title, benefits of physical education. I think that was just the benefits of physical education was the title. And then same thing, you want to make sure that you space until this is lined up with the left margin until the number drops down, and then you push backspace or delete to push it back, and then all of the headers for the different pages are then done. I'm just going to double check the margins because I didn't do that yet for this, and they're correct. They're 1 inch all around, so I don't need to do anything with that. The other thing I noticed is that there is an extra space between the student name and the title. So I'm just, and this I think is a spacing issue. So I'm going to, which doesn't look like there's a spacing issue here, but it's probably because it's double spaced. But I'm just going to select the entire document just to make sure the spacing is what I want it to be. And I've shown this before, but this is where you open that paragraph dialog box. So you find this icon, it's the same on a PC, and then you want to open up this paragraph dialog box, and you want the spacing here to be before and after set at 0 and line spacing at double, and then that will fix those big spaces. So that would be like I said before, what that does is anytime I hit the enter key, it tells Word how much of a space you want when you hit the enter key. So whereas, excuse me, before you could see that this had all of the larger spaces when I hit the enter key, once we go into that paragraph dialog box, put the spacing before and after at 0 and then the line spacing at double, that fixes that. And then I'm going to go ahead and use my site to just kind of say, I think that looks about centered right there. And that is it for the cover page. So I'm going to go back to, whoops, that's a little bit too large. Never know how big to make these when I'm doing video lectures. Okay, so then we move on to the abstract page. Some people have written abstracts and some people haven't. You don't have to. I do encourage you to do it because it is part of APA format. I'm not going to read through this as part of the video lecture that I'm doing, but I encourage you to do it to get in the habit of doing it. If you didn't do it for the classical argument paper and you don't want to, don't worry about it. I'm not going to take any points off. I would ask that you do it for the problem solution paper. Although there is one thing that I'm seeing, and I've seen this in a few documents, is that people are doing double spaces between their sentences rather than single space, and you should be able to see this. If I turn on the paragraph using this paragraph icon up here, it will show me, and I don't know if you can see it, but it shows two little dots every time there's a space. It gives you a dot. Sorry, that's my mom. But I can visually see it just because I've been writing and grading documents for ages. So if you got a note for me that there are no longer two spaces between sentences, then you want to go through and do that just like I did it. So that's an ongoing. It's not an ongoing debate. It's the two sentences, the two spaces between sentences is an old rule that was in place when the typewriter was being used. So it was popular in journalism and in newspapers, but with the advent of writing documents on a computer rather than like a typewriter or publishing in a newspaper article, we no longer require an APA, APA does state that it's one space between sentences, so that is an APA prescription. The other thing is, I'm noticing this green down here. I know I said I wasn't going to go through this, but I just want to see what's causing this green line under this particular sentence. So the sentence says, the first way that physical education can be beneficial in the school-aged population is that it is a fantastic outlet for pent-up energy that can potentially disrupt class and learning. So the reason this is underlined is because this is a comma splice. And if I get rid of the comma, you can see that it takes that away. So there's no comma needed for that particular sentence. And I think this is another place where there's an additional space. I can visually see all the spaces, like I said, because I've been working and grading and writing docs for forever. And I, to myself, several years ago, was very staunch that no, there are two spaces between sentences, and then it was drilled into my head eventually that there's only one space between sentences. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the actual essay itself. The student is doing the correct thing by restating the full title before the actual essay. So you do need to do that. You state the title twice. You state it on the actual cover page. You state either the whole thing or part of it in the header. And then, I know this is kind of three things, but and then you restate the whole thing before the actual essay goes. So there's no additional spaces or anything. This is lined up where you can see this is the margin space, that 1 inch from the top, 1 inch down. So the actual text begins here, and that lines up with that. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the introduction, and this is where I'm going to turn on the track changes. Okay, so, all right, so I'm going to read through the introduction, and then I'll kind of talk about, I'll give some notes, and I'll talk about, I might end up revising something, I don't know. This is the first time I'm looking at this paper, so I haven't, like, prepared anything, because I'm trying to keep it as much as it is for how I look at all of your papers, which is I don't read through them all and then read through them all again and provide feedback. So I read them and provide feedback at the same time. Okay, so I'm going to read the, I think this is the first full sentence, but I could be wrong. But it says, numerous studies have been conducted on the effects of physical education in the school system. Focusing on physical education during school hours is the only exercise most students participate in. Physical education has been shown to improve children's mental focus and help promote healthy brain activity. Physical education helps promote a healthy lifestyle and combat child obesity. And physical education opens up opportunities later on for students to participate in extracurricular sports. And then I'll read the rest of it. There remain differences in views on the importance of physical education in the school system, and there are some studies that claim there are no benefits from physical education in the school system, and there are studies that claim it hinders children to have physical education in the school system. Okay, so I've got notes for this introduction. So and the notes that I'm going to be giving this particular introduction are very similar and normal notes that I've been giving to a lot of other people in their classical argument drafts. And one of the main notes is that there is what we call an implied thesis statement. So an implied thesis statement is, after I've read something, I can infer that what the argument is going to be. So I believe, if I'm inferring correctly, that this person is writing that there should be there are benefits to physical education in the school system, and that this is something that should and this is where I get lost, because when there's no explicit thesis, I kind of have to fill in the blanks. Like the reason, well, there's some reasons up here, right? It should be in the school system for these reasons. Right, it promotes a healthy lifestyle, combats obesity, and then opens up opportunities later for, extracurricular activities. One thing that's missing, and why I'm saying I'm having to fill in the blanks, is when I'm thinking about, because the first thing I'm thinking about is, what is the controversy? So the classical argument paper has to be, it's an argumentative paper, right? It's the classical argument. Excuse me. So the very first thing that I'm looking for is, what is the controversy in which you are engaging? And so sometimes it's very obvious, and sometimes it's not as obvious, because it just depends on the cultural level or the cultural currency of the controversy that's at hand. Like some controversies, like abortion, right, that has a lot of cultural currency in terms of controversy, because even just by saying that, I can already be thinking of maybe not a million, but a lot of different viewpoints from multiple sides of that particular controversy. So, and then you've got more slightly controversies that have less cultural currency, and I think this would fall into that category. So the main question on my mind is, well, what is the controversy of I'm just going to call it PE, and I'm also going to recommend that to the student. But the student tells us here, there are some studies that claim there are no benefits from PE in the school system, and there are studies that claim it hinders children to have PE in the school system. But in what way? So, and that's all information that needs to go in the introduction. So this introduction is needing specificity, and this is a note that I've given to a lot of students in their drafts. So, and I'm going to make a note on the actual thesis itself. Well, that there is no thesis. So I would say here, right, oops, I'm still in all caps. So while there is an implicit thesis, there is no explicit thesis that states in one sentence what the argument is, including the subclaims. The intro paragraph has subclaims, right? This idea of, so the student is starting to do forecasting. They're starting to, when they provide these subclaims of promoting a healthy lifestyle, the obesity, and then the extracurricular activities later in life. But that's all we're given. So we have no information in the introduction in terms of, well, what is actually the controversy? So what are people saying? Because at the top of my mind, I'm like, I don't know what people would say PE is problematic. Like, there's more well-known controversies of, say, fine arts in the public school system, because there's been a decrease in funding and governmental funding for fine arts programs in the school system, or school systems, at least I should say public school systems. And when I say school systems, I would say high school or K through 12. That's another specificity that this writer, the student, needs to offer, is when they say school system, right? We need more specificity, so be more specific. Is it K through 12, public or private? Because that has to do with funding, government funding. So the issue, the controversy of the decrease in governmental funding for fine arts programs in public school programs in K through 12, that is a very well-known argument or controversy. That is right, that it's easier to see what is the opposition, what is, what are the two sides of this controversy, if not more than two sides. So when it comes to PE, I personally haven't heard of any studies. I'm guessing that the student will provide opposition at some point in here in terms of what is that opposition, but we do need to know that in the introduction itself. Whoops, sorry, I'm losing my place. So before I go on to, so what this student needs to do, and I'm just going to make I think I'll actually make, I don't have the same, I just made it a web link. So I'm going to make notes on the introduction, and this is doing it in track changes, which is why it's purple and underlined, but that's fine. So for the introduction, right, the main thing is, what is the controversy, right? We know what your argument implicitly is, but you aren't providing information about what the actual issue is with which you are engaging. So if I were writing my classical argument paper on that idea of fine arts programs in K through 12 public school systems, in my introduction, I would start out with something like, and I'm going to make up information because I don't know specific information about it, but, in 1997, there was a substantial decrease in federal and state funding for fine arts programs, including things like theater, art, dance, music, blah, 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 blah. Since this decrease in funding occurred, there have been, various sides have, what's the word I want to say? I'm at a miss for a verb, which is always an issue. Right, various sides, I'm going to talk a little bit more colloquially, but various sides have come out to protest this decrease in funding. The decrease in funding, and here's where I would kind of talk about the actual controversy, right? The justification for the decrease in funding is because, quotation, and then I would provide some evidence as to what the actual controversy is, like why this controversy is in fact a controversy. So I would make that note here, right? You need to provide evidence or justification that the controversy is in fact a controversy. And this is usually done through integrating evidence in the introduction. And this is why I've said it before, using evidence in your introduction is very crucial for building your own ethos as a writer. So you as a writer I know you spend a lot of time dissecting other people's writing in terms of how effective they are. So now you need to think about how to be an effective writer yourself. And part of that is incorporating evidence in the introduction, because if you just have a whole introduction that's just you talking, it's kind of like, I have no evidence that you have any idea that you know what you're talking about. Why should I keep reading? Why do I think you're a credible writer about this particular topic? So again, going back to that idea of fine arts, I would provide evidence of, the justification for this blah, 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 right? And then I would provide evidence from the other side as well, right? Those people who oppose decrease in funding of fine arts programs in public school systems suggest blankety, blankety, blank, right? Evidence that says this, right? So first, I would do that in the introduction, right? Providing justification for the actual controversy. Then I would go into forecasting, right? So then, and that's a type of refutation, or it should be in theory, because at this point in the introduction, you have, right? So first, providing justification or evidence that the controversy is in fact a controversy by explicating it to some degree right? And both sides of the controversy. And then from there, sorry, that's track changes. You can ignore that. But I don't want those numbers. So I'm just going to push, get rid of it. From there, then you would start the forecasting part of it. And like I said, this is kind of a refutation in theory, because you are now, as a writer, getting into what side of the controversy you're on. I can't spell controversy. And providing a forecast of subclaims that will develop your argument / thesis. So then you get into the actual forecasting. And forecasting and that initial refutation, a lot of people have struggled with forecasting, but you need, the introduction is like a mini essay, so to speak. So some people, at least what I understand from having taught these types of papers for years on end, is that people worry that if I give this information in the introduction, then what else do I have to talk about in the body of this paper? And it's kind of like, well, it's not, you want to be repetitious because you're hammering home a particular argument. So it's there, and that's why there's a difference between good repetition and bad repetition. But in the introduction, right, you need to say, here's everything I got. This is all of it. It's just in a condensed, very specific, rhetorically intended part of the essay, which is the introduction. But you kind of have to give away everything you have in the introduction, right? Here's the controversy. Here's evidence that demonstrates its actual controversy. Now, here I'm going to move into the forecasting, which is kind of a refutation of one of those sides of the opposition or the controversy. And then getting into those subclaims, right? And sometimes the subclaims, you can provide brief evidence about that will help build your ethos as a writer, build your credibility on the particular topic that you've done your research and you have some inkling as to what you're talking about. So you would want to do that, and that's so the reader is kind of following along with what you're doing. But going back to the idea of students stressing about, if I put the information in my introduction, what do I have left to put in my body paragraphs? Like I said, you need to kind of show all your cards, so to speak, in your introduction. But you show them in a way that's rhetorically purposeful, right? You don't spend your entire introduction saying, here's all my evidence and all my analysis and all my everything, right? You're kind of giving little bits and clues, and not clues, but like, here's this and here's this and here's this. And then in your body paragraph, you're repeating those ideas, but you're developing on them even further through analysis. So it's really this, and that's why I always call it a very aggressive type of writing, because there's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of returning back to ideas and going back to, particularly the thesis. So, right, first demonstrating that there's actually a controversy. Then you go into the forecasting, providing those subclaims, which may need evidence in theory, it's best if you have evidence. It always is. But then you just have to walk that line of making sure you're not over dependent on evidence. And then you eventually move into your thesis statement. So that's kind of what I would say higher order concerns for this introduction. They start with the idea of what side they're on. That's not bad, but the rhetorical problem with this is you're not, the writer here is not providing themselves the space to talk about the controversy. They've ordered this introduction as PE is really good. Here's all these things that it does that's good. And then here are some subclaims, even though this is all kind of subclaims a little bit. And then, but BTW, by the way, people do say the opposite, and then there's no thesis statement. So this is kind of in the opposite order than I would put it. And I also say it because it's easier for yourselves as writers to start with a larger picture. And if you look at the visual guide to academic writing, that handout that I've talked, I can't remember if I've talked about it with you guys from the beginning of the course or my literature course, definitely my other course. But the reason the introduction is an upside down triangle is because you're starting really wide. So you're starting by saying, here's this controversy. It actually exists. Here's evidence that demonstrates from credible sources that it actually exists. These are what the opposing sides say. And then moving more narrow into, here's my particular side of the opposition. Here are some subclaims that are refuting the other side. And then moving even more narrow into the thesis itself. So those are the higher order concerns in this introduction. that I would talk about. So, more specificity all across the board. I would suggest a reorganization of this and then adding information that's not here. The other thing, there's some local, some local order concerns in here. Right, numerous studies have been conducted on the effects of physical education. And here's where I would say wherever you first use a thing that you can then use an acronym, I would put it wherever it happens first and then just say PE the rest of the time because it's easier as a writer and it's easier for the reader to constantly read physical education, physical education, physical education, physical education. It's kind of like it's harder for the reader. And honestly, for the writers, it doesn't matter what's easier for you as a writer. It's everything you're doing is for the reader. That's all that matters. So acronyms, once the reader knows what the acronym is standing in for, it's much easier for the reader to follow along. That can get very confusing in scientific papers, but when there's like nothing but acronyms. But for something like this, it's definitely better for the reader. PE in the school system, focusing on physical education, right? And here's where, right, they would move to on PE during school hours is the only exercise most students participate in. This is a note I've given to a lot of people, and I'm going to demonstrate the revision here, or really this is editing. But in staying away from ending clauses or sentences with prepositions, and in as a preposition, you just say in which. Now I think I want to keep original showing markup. That's where that'll allow me to see it. Nope. Okay. In which most students participate. Right, period. That sentence needs to end there. But right, we want to avoid ending prepositions should never go at the end of a clause or sentence because of the grammatical nature of what a preposition is. Because a preposition is showing something, it's showing a positionality to something. Participate in what? right? So we're waiting for an object to come after that preposition. So that's why we never grammatically end clauses or sentences, full clauses, either dependent clauses or independent clauses with prepositions. And there are a lot of prepositions. So I should give you guys a list of prepositions. PE has been shown to improve children's mental focus and help promote healthy brain activity. My note would be, where's your evidence for this? And yes, I need it in the introduction. Same thing with, if this person wants to make this a list, because in theory, were the student to revise giving the notes I'm providing, there would be a different introduction here that would open with the controversy evidence that supports the controversy, and then going into this part, which is the forecasting and the subclaims. So they might say something like, PE has been shown, it's a little wordy, to improve, to edit for concision or edit for wordiness, right? You can just say arguably improves children's mental focus and help. And if we just want to make this one long list, we can just, whoops, I don't want to get rid of that one, comma, and we're using improves, we're using, right, so our subject-verb agreement, helps promote healthy brain activity, and we have promote again, so we'll just make that all one entity. Helps promote healthy brain activity and lifestyle, and then comma, because we've got lots of entities, and combats, because again, subject-verb agreement, childhood obesity, and then end there. I'm going to show final showing markup, so maybe that will help a little bit. Sorry, my mother-in-law had surgery today. Okay, so PE arguably, and I would want to put this in commas, arguably improves children's mental focus, comma, helps promote healthy brain activity, no comma, and lifestyle, and combats childhood obesity, period. Additionally, PE opens up opportunity later on. Later on is a little bit colloquial for students to participate in extracurricular sports. So my note for this student for this particular comment or this particular part would be, do you mean that PE, because I also don't know what child age, like I said, there's no specificity in terms of, are you talking about elementary school, all of K through 12, high school? So there's no sense of like what part of like the range of what defines a child, like that needs more specificity. So do you mean that PE helps children when they are adults with participating in active and I'm saying active extracurricular because you can have inactive extracurricular activities, and I might even say physically active, because it's not to say that you can be active but you're not necessarily physically active extracurricular activities. So that would be my note for that. And that's everything I would say about the introduction. And then I'm going to go into the first body paragraph. I'm not going to go through all of the paragraphs because what's very common in these types of drafts is that whatever somebody is doing in one paragraph, they tend to be doing in the rest of their paragraphs. So a lot of the notes that I end up making are repetitious themselves, and I tend to avoid I try to avoid repetitious notes because I expect the student to read one note and then apply that in the revision process to the entire paper. So it's not, I only made the note here, so the issue was only here. It's, this is a note that you need to consider in revision across your entire paper. So that's one of the ways that instructors, and particularly writing instructors who have a lot of experience in giving feedback on writing, is that we don't give notes on everything because we just don't have the time. And also it's not helpful to the student. Okay, so I'm going to go through this first body paragraph. So according to the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston, 2013, and that's in parentheses, and I'll talk about that in a second, article, and then we have a quotation, no more than half of American youth meet current evidence-based guidelines of at least an hour of vigorous or moderate intensity physical activity daily, and children are in school for nearly half of their waking hours. When children have a structured exercise environment they will participate in outside of school, they usually will not commit to exercising. And then we have another quotation. Only 21.6% of 6 to 19-year-old children and adolescents in the United States attain 60 or more minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity on at least 5 days per week. Children today are more sedentary than previous generations. This article recommends the whole of school approach to encourage activities such as walking or riding a bike to school while discouraging inactivity. Recess, lunch breaks, and frequent classroom breaks should be included and not taken away as punishment. Physical education should be included as a core subject in all systems, regardless of education levels. Okay. So when I read body paragraphs, the first thing I'm looking for is the major argument in the paragraph. So, and how that major argument is supporting the thesis. So that's the first thing I look for because that's the biggest that's the biggest higher order concern in body paragraphs. So I cannot extricate a single argument that if I asked this writer, what is this paragraph about? What is this paragraph's argumentative purpose? And how does this argumentative purpose support the thesis? I personally, there are things in here that I could say, here's how these things are supporting the thesis, even though there's an implied thesis, right? It's not an explicit thesis. I don't know what the subclaim is exactly. And if we go back to those ideas of subclaim, is this paragraph focusing on promotion of mental focus and healthy brain activity, healthy lifestyle, obesity, the extracurricular angle? So anytime a reader is provided subclaims, the reader immediately expects the paragraph to address one of those subclaims. So, but this paragraph doesn't address any of those subclaims. To me, this paragraph is more introductory material because it's doing some of the things that I talked about earlier about the providing information to justify that it's a controversy. Although this paragraph still does not do that, this paragraph is really providing a lot of evidence for why PE should be something. And again, I'm at a loss for what to say instead of something because I don't know what the controversy is. I don't know if there's been a decrease in physical education programs in public school systems within certain age ranges. There's a lot of blanks for me that I don't have the answers to because the writer hasn't provided them for me. So I don't know what the opposition is, right? Is it like the fine arts programs where there's been a decrease of governmental funding? Has it been that there's just with or without the idea of funding, there's just a decrease in programs, that PE has become an elective? Is that a movement that we're seeing in the public school systems? So in terms of what the argument is, like the opposition, I have no idea. Just because I personally don't know about it and I haven't been provided that information from the writer. So this paragraph is really and it gives evidence, which is good. But if we look at what the evidence is, right, this one is talking about the exercise that, and I think what the writer is doing in terms of analysis here is saying that this, like, without PE, children aren't going to exercise. So I think that there needs to be a little bit more analysis here in terms of this particular quotation, because children are in school for nearly half of their waking hours. I'm struggling to believe that. So I feel like that needs more. And if children are in school for nearly half of their waking hours, I just, like I said, I struggle to believe that. It's possible, but I feel like more information is needed on that if it's important to argue for this idea that PE helps provide that physical activity that children need, that without PE, without this structured exercise environment, they usually will not commit to exercising. And then what our writer is doing is supporting that argument, because when I first read this, I was like, what's your proof? And then here they say only 21.6% of 6 to 19-year-old children and adolescents in the U.S. attain 60 or more minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity on at least 5 days per week. My first question is, 21% in what I know of population statistics seems like a lot. So what this writer needs to do is give some type of indication of what that looks like, not as a percentage. If it said, like, because sometimes you can say like 2% of the population, okay, well that's still like millions and millions of people. So in terms of 21.6%, why is that a problematic percentage? So the writer needs to explain that. This quotation is both an orphan quotation and a hit and run quotation. So that would be a comment that I would make, right? Orphan and hit and run. And it's both of those because if we look at the full clause in which the quotation exists, it starts with a quotation and it ends with a quotation. So there's no contextual signpost to introduce, right? This could be easily introduced by saying something like, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, parentheses 2018, provide the statistics that only 21.6% of 6 to 9, blah, 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 right? That's one easy way. And then that would also get rid of the need for the in-text citation, because the writer has already cited that information prior to the quotation. It's a hit and run quotation. A hit and run quotation is not always an orphan quotation. In this case, it is. A hit and run quotation means you are providing a quotation, but then you don't address it, really. So if we think about, this is the quotation, this is the analysis that the writer has provided in respect to that particular quotation. Children today are more sedentary than previous generations. That begs a lot of questions. So the quotation begs questions in terms of the percentage, that 21.6%. What this writer would need to do here is address this particular quotation. Also, previous generations. What does that mean? We know that this article from the CDC is from 2018, so it's very recent. But what does that percentage look like in previous generations? This is an argument by itself, but there's no evidence to support. Maybe it was 60% in previous generations and now it's 21%. Okay, wow, that's an argument, right? But maybe it was 10% in previous generations and now it's 21%, which would suggest that students are, or yes, that children and adolescents have increased in their physical activity. So this particular analysis is not doing the work that it needs to do for the quotation that precedes it. So it needs more analysis, does not address the prior evidence, and how do we know what the percentage of physically active children was in previous generations. So that would be that. And then the next bit is this idea of, and I'll talk about the local order of integrating this, this article recommends the whole school approach, walking or riding a bike to school while discouraging inactivity, recess, lunch breaks. This is all a quotation here. Recess, lunch breaks, and frequent classroom breaks should be included and not taken away as punishment. Okay, so if I were to implicitly infer what this paragraph is arguing is exercise, which goes back to the writer's first sentence, this idea that it's during PE, during these school hours, is arguably the only exercise in which most students participate. That, I think, is the argument of this particular paragraph. That being said, a topic sentence would need to be written that would address that in particular. So I'm just going to take a stab at writing a topic sentence for this particular paragraph. So that would be something like, and topic sentences feel redundant or simple because they really should be, but they're simple and complex at the same time. They're complex because of their rhetorical purpose. They're simple in terms of what you actually need to write. So one of the primary, not even primary, well, it could be, one of the primary reasons PE should, and I'm going to say X, because that's that, I don't know what the controversy is, like that idea of if physical education PE programs are being viewed as, are being turned into electives, if they're not getting funded, if they're, right, this needs to, where the X is, that needs to explicitly address the opposition. But one of the primary reasons PE should, right, not be considered an elective, for example, if that was the argument, is that it is one of the only forms of structured physical activity that students in, and you need to be specific, public school systems receive. So that would be kind of a topic sentence for this, but it would give the reader, it would say, okay, this paragraph is going to focus on, sorry, I didn't even use the word exercise. Physical activity, I don't need physical activity, I just need physical exercise. Well, exercise is physical, so I don't even need that word. And then since I've changed this, I do want to keep structured though. Structured exercise that students in public school systems receive. So again, you need to be specific about the type of system you're referring to. And then again, I would be more specific still about students. Are we talking again elementary, K through 12, high school, middle school? What does that look like? But that would be more of a topic sentence that provides an argument for what this paragraph is going to be about, But then there needs to be more analysis in this paragraph that talks explicitly about the exercise. The one thing I'm going to do here, I'm going to turn track changes off for a second, is I'm going to highlight the quotations. This one is already highlighted, so I don't want to redo that one. And this is something I recommend people do if they worry that they're depending on sources, which is something that you have to be careful of. Because what you want to do is you want to see, and I'm also going to highlight the citations. And the reason you want to do this is because you want to see how much of a paragraph is your actual voice versus your source's voice or voices and citations. So after I've done that, and now I will highlight the topic sentence would be the writer's voice, but I'm going to highlight, I haven't used yellow, right? We're going to highlight the writer's voice. I do this in my own writing because I need to make sure that I am, your voice, you're the writer, so your voice needs to be the dominant voice in everything. So you need to always balance how much evidence you have versus how much, I still want to highlight this just to show. It's not going to let me because I have that. Okay, well, just looking at the paragraph, you can see that the yellow is the writer's voice. That is not the dominant voice in this paragraph. The dominant voice are the sources, the evidence. The evidence is not bad. The evidence is good, but the writer would need to go in here and either shorten some of those quotations. Like, do you absolutely need this idea that, like, children are in school for nearly half their waking hours? Is that absolutely vital, right? So you have to kind of question yourself in terms of how much, right? Because there's 3 hefty sized quotations here, and then only the yellow bits are the writer's voice. So you want to see at least 50%. I would want to see 50% of this in yellow, if not more. You really want to see more than 50% in your own voice, where you pepper in that evidence and then you do the analysis. So this writer currently is dependent on sources, and so they need to work to either minimize, like shorten some of the quotations they have, or provide more analysis. Like, those are kind of the 2 options. So also this person has this in, I'm going to go to a local order concern for APA. This is how you would do that. According to the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston, and then you would put the year in parentheses, and then you don't even need article. So that would take away even more of the writer's voice. No more than half American, blah, 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 right? When children have a certain blah, blah, right, this would need more information. I would want more information here about this idea of nearly half of their waking hours. Okay, well, what if they're involved in something outside of school? What is the percentage of students that are engaged in extracurricular activities at whatever age students this particular writer is addressing, right? Are they on a sports team? Are they competitively competing in something? When I was a child, I had, of course, physical education, but then I had very rigorous dance lessons almost every day of the week. So I did ballet, tap, and jazz because I was a competitive dancer. So I was very active as a child. And I spent a lot of time, and I played video games as a child. I had I had the Atari and all the Nintendos. I was lucky enough to have all those, but I still spent a lot of time outside. So this is, and what I'm doing is begging questions about what the writer is giving to me, right? Outside of school, they usually will not commit to exercising. But what's the percentage of students that are, or what are percentage of children and in whatever age group this writer is addressing? What's the percentage of them that are engaged in outside of school physical activities, structured activities? I think explicitly is what this writer is addressing. And I talked about this being an orphan quotation, and again, they don't need this. And I think this person needs a very minor note, but one that really annoys me. I'm also a graphic designer. These are called tick marks. When you just have the two little lines instead of the quotation. Can you tell the difference between the tick mark and up here where we have an actual quotation mark? So this is grammatically wrong because you don't want tick marks. And I think this person also needs single quotations to go around whole of school rather than that. So I'm going to add and you have to do this manually and then go back like that. Because if I just added that, it's going to put the apostrophe in the opposite direction. So you have to do that manually. And I'm going to get rid of those tick marks. Whoops, but I only want the one. But down here, I'm going to put the quotation marks rather than the tick marks. Tick marks. Big pet peeve of mine because it has to do with the formatting and the visual design of a document. But that also is what that has to do with integrating quotations. And I think that's all I would have to say about this particular paragraph. I'm going to do the next body paragraph. So according to the Godman 2018 article, exercise changes the brain in ways that protect memory and thinking skills. Okay, we have a much better implicit topic sentence, and I'll explain why it's implicit in just a second. First, I want to read through the entire paragraph. So exercise helps release natural feel-good hormones and helps prevent depression. And then we have an orphan quotation. In a study done at UBC, researchers found that regular aerobic exercise, the kind that gets your heart and your sweat glands pumping, appears to boost the size of the hippocampus, the brain area involved in verbal memory and learning. And I'm just getting rid of these double spaces. Children need a break during the day from learning. Do they? And you guys don't need any breaks from learning, right? And physical education allows them that needed break. And here we have a fragment. Helps children burn off extra energy. So said children are calmer in class. When students have pent-up energy, they are fidgeting and inattentive in class. Okay, so I have a lot of things to say about this paragraph. So it's definitely, whereas I think this paragraph is about exercise, this one is about the, if we go back to the introduction, this part here, this subclaim, this forecasting, improves children's mental focus, helps promote healthy brain activity. So, and the reason I'm saying this is an implied topic sentence is because, and I'm going to write this note down here under my notes for students. And topic sentences. Not just topic sentences, but refrain from, and some of you have gotten this note from me, from opening and closing paragraphs with quotations or evidence. And there's a reason for this. So, one, refrain from opening because you need to provide yourself the rhetorical space to set up the argument for the paragraph in your own voice. That's why we don't want to open paragraphs with quotations or any type of evidence. And then two, or just say, I'll just the same parallelism, refrain from closing paragraphs with quotations, because this disallows you as the writer to not be able to provide analysis of why that evidence is there in the first place. So if you just, I'm guilty of this. This is a bad writing habit that I have, and I've had to work very hard to overcome it. But that is closing paragraphs with quotations. It's taken me a while, but anytime I would read through something I'm writing, I'm like, why do I end every paragraph with a quotation? It's really frustrating. Like, I know I'm not supposed to do this, yet I still do it. And then I have to reset up the paragraph and how I'm introducing quotation, and then provide more evidence, and blah, 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 blah. Those are kind of rules of thumb in terms of academic arguing. And so if we go back to this, and I know the writer didn't close with a quotation, but I did want to just give that kind of rule of thumb, because this is the second paragraph that they've opened with evidence. And as I said, when you're doing things in one paragraph, you're likely to do in all paragraphs. Again, we can see that in the next paragraph after that, they open it with evidence. And also in the paragraph after that, they're opening it with an orphan quotation. So, and it's just a writing style. And that's why it's a draft. So a topic sentence is needed. I'm going to turn my track changes back on. But a topic sentence is necessary for this. So, and I like to think of topic sentences as kind of a formula. So don't hesitate to kind of repeat a formula for a topic sentence, because then once you get in the habit of writing topic sentences, you'll start to get a feel for what they should be, and then you could play around a little bit word-wise with how you write topic sentences. But again, right, another reason PE should, again, I don't know the opposition, should not be, I apologize to this student because I don't know the opposition, is that PE programs, and I'm just going to rip the words from the introduction. Sorry, I passed it. Because this is that idea of good repetition. It's that idea of jogging a reader's memory, because the short-term memory is like 7 seconds. So by the time, if I'm reading this through, I've looked at it several times now, so I know, but if I'm reading this through one time, I may not remember the words children's mental focus and promoting of healthy brain activity. But sometimes you can jog the reader's memory when you use those same phrases, and then it helps the reader be like, oh, yeah, that's right, you mentioned that in the introduction. I got it now. But I'm going to try to just rip this language exactly as an attempt to do that, because, again, that's easier for the reader, and you're writing for the reader. You're not writing for yourself. So I'm looking at mental focus and the promotion of healthy brain activity. So if I go back to this topic sentence, I've already forgotten it because that's short-term memory. Gosh darn it, short-term memory. Mental focus. Mental focus is what I need. And I'm going to say, to make it more arguable, increased mental focus and short-term memory. Healthy brain activity. That makes me question, what is that? Okay, I don't have a definition for the word health. I do work in disability studies, and if you ask me to define healthy, I can't. I don't believe there is a definition for it. So every time I see the word healthy, I'm like, what does it mean? So it's a little frustrating for me as a writer, or as a reader, excuse me. Increased muscle. And so what makes me want to do that is always put the word healthy in quotation marks. It's just like the word real. Like, I don't believe in real or reality. So, because I'm a post-structuralist and it's a long story, but there's things like that there are words that have immense arguments happening about them, or that, like the word real, good luck explaining that one. Same with healthy. What does healthy mean? I dare you to write about it. I used to have students write definition papers, and they plagued me so bad because it was just like, nothing means anything. And so I don't teach that assignment anymore because I'm not looking to go crazy just yet. Again, define crazy. Good luck. But healthy brain activity, I would expect a student to define what healthy brain activity looks like. Also, mental focus. So there are times when definitions are necessary. So what is healthy brain activity? Increased mental focus is a little bit like, okay, I think I know what that means. But then in the back of my head, I'm going, what about those children who have been diagnosed with ADD and ADHD, and is that even a real thing? And what is happening with Big Pharma and the pharmacological industry? And so my brain goes to like a million other things. But what is healthy brain activity? You're going to have to define. There's no way around it. Because that's going to beg a lot of questions. And anytime begging a question is a logical fallacy, which a logical fallacy, as you all should know, is a flaw in your logic. So first I would have that kind of topic sentence there that says, all right, people, this is what this paragraph is going to be talking about. And then I might, okay, and to the writer, good luck. I wish you the best with that, because this is where you would want to do that. Healthy brain activity can be arguably defined as, right, you're going to have to do a lot of hedging, because someone else is going to swoop in and say, well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? Right? So you need to be specific about, and it's possible that you also need to be specific about what brain activity you're talking about. So the brain has a lot of activities that happen in it. I think I've talked about like neuroplasticity, for example. Are we talking about neural bridges being built? Are we talking about, increasing brain cells, like maintaining brain cells, increased memory, anything because the brain, right, is something that can be taught and trained and built. So just like any other muscle in the body. So not only defining healthy, but also defining brain activity. If you're being specific to focus, that's another story. Then you have to define focus, right? But so some definition work is necessary here. And this is another place, local issue, where we can just put the year for, and you don't need article. You can just use the author's last name according to blah blah Godman. That's quite a last name. Sorry. Exercise changes the brain in ways that protect memory and thinking skills. Okay. What? Sorry. I want to know how. But I'm just going to keep reading. Exercise helps release natural feel-good hormones. What are those hormones? And helps prevent depression. Okay, but is this paragraph about depression, or is that just like an added bonus that you're throwing in for your reader? More analysis. This is, if we go back to thinking about, remember how I highlighted the evidence versus the writer's voice. You're going to see that same thing here just about, because we've got And I'm going to turn my track changes off for this. Otherwise, it's just going to have a lot of notes on the side. I'm just going to include everything in this. But that's a quotation. This is a quotation. Okay. So if this is a quotation, exercise changes the brain in ways that protect memory and thinking skills. Exercise helps release natural feel-good hormones and helps prevent depression. That's not sufficient analysis for the evidence that has just been provided to us, right? And then also, and every time you give evidence, always think of your reader as asking, why are you giving me this evidence? It is not fun to read through quotations. I much would prefer to just read through your writing. But the second people start integrating quotations, it's more work for the reader because it's a switch in tone, it's a switch in writing, it's evidence. It's very rhetorically draining for the brain. But this needs more in terms of analysis. So, oops, I'm just going to back to add a comment here. So, right, this is insufficient analysis for the prior quotation. So what we want to know is, how does it change the brain? Does Godman, oh God, that name, does this writer of that article have statistics on anything? Because I'd like to know, like, in what ways it protects the memory and thinking skills. Like, what does that protection look like? And also, in this article, are they focusing on children or are they focusing on adults? So this information that comes after the quotation just seems to be like, if I were guessing, and I could be wrong, this is a paraphrase of things that Godman said in his article, and now I'm just saying it as paraphrase. It's not analysis that says, you know, this protection of memory and thinking skills, which according to Godman occurred in children ages 12 to 15, demonstrates that physical education programs do in fact increase, you know, this particular type of brain activity, right? Memory and thinking skills. Again, what is thinking? Define it. I dare you. But so need more evidence. And then we have an orphan quotation, and it's more of the same. So arguably, if this is paraphrase here, I would also put this as somebody else's voice. Because I don't know how the hormone release and the preventative depression is related to the protection of memory and thinking skills. And then in this next quotation, in a study done at UBC, researchers found that regular aerobic exercise, blah, 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 appears to boost the size of the hippocampus. Okay, I'm going to demonstrate how to omit something from a quotation. I don't think any of that is necessary. I think we all know what aerobic exercise is. I'm going to use a bracketed ellipsis. And bracketed ellipses, this is also a good thing to show you. When they do something like this where they go on multiple lines, you need to space until it's all on one line. So that's how you would omit information and make information from a quotation and make the quotation shorter, is using this bracket, period, space, bracket. That's called a bracketed ellipsis. That's an omission. So it means something to the reader. It says the writer has omitted information that is not critically relevant to this particular paragraph or essay. But you're giving the citation. So if the reader wanted to read through the actual full quotation, they could find that source and read through it. But again, we have another orphan paragraph and quotation, or excuse me, hit and run. I'd say this is an orphan and a hit and run quotation, and hopefully the orphan part is orphan, right, because there's no contextual lead-in to this quotation in the writer's voice. And then hit and run, because if we think about what this what this quotation says, I don't even know if in a study done at the UBC, like I would also argue that all of this could be taken out of the quotation. And because it's God-man, and the writer's already given the year, so I'm not giving it again. Unless I would only give the year if there were multiple articles by this God-man person. So if God-man had published an article in 2015 and 2018, and I'm quoting from both articles, I would want to give both dates so the reader knew, okay, this is from the 2015 article versus 2018. But I'm guessing that there's only the one here, so I'm going to leave the year out because it's not necessary. Right, so I made that, I made it not an orphan anymore because I gave it some signpost, and I got rid of a lot of information that isn't vitally necessary, and now I can get rid of all those spaces. So the quotation is much shorter, and then I wouldn't need the citation. But if we think about what that now very short quotation is saying, is that regular aerobic exercise appears to boost the size of the hippocampus, which has to do with verbal memory and learning. And if we look at what comes after that, children need a break during the day from learning, and physical education allows them that needed break. What does that have to do with the previous quotation that just came before that? That's what I'm asking as your reader and as your grader. So that's why it's a hit and run. You dropped in this quotation, and then the writer did not address the quotation about verbal memory and learning. So, so what I would say here, right, I would give that note of, well, I don't think I have to. I've already given the note of hit and run, so I would just add to that one. I would say analysis is needed about this specific quotation that demonstrates how it is working for both the paragraphs and essays argument. So so analysis is needed there. And then there's this idea of, and this is all the author's voice, so I'm going to put it in that yellow. And I wrote this, so I'm going to put it in that yellow. And then, of course, the topic sentence would be in yellow. That children need a break during the day from learning, and PE allows them that needed break. You could join this sentence by turning it into a gerund, an ing verb. Helping children burn off extra energy. Said is, when people say that in that way, it's a little colloquial. You can just say, so they are calmer in class. I need evidence. So evidence is needed for this. And then when students have pent-up energy, they are fidgeting and inattentive in class. That I would transition. The cohesion here is a little choppy, so I would transition a little bit differently here. So children need a break during the day. I would say the school day, to be more specific, from learning. But aren't we learning in PE? That's begging a question. Especially the brain is learning, at least, right? If exercise is allowing my brain to increase verbal memory and learning, that's a type of learning, right? So what this writer is saying when they say children need a break during the school day from learning is saying that no learning happens in PE. But that, I think, is contradictory to what the writer is actually trying to say. That there is a type of learning that happens in PE, but it's a physical learning. Yes. sorry, I'm also an embodiment theorist, so I have a really hard time defining what is the body, what is the mind, what is the brain, so that also gets in my brain a little, like a bee in my bonnet. But I would say this particular word, right? So there's no, and I would put that in quotation marks, learning in PE allows them that needed break, helping children burn off extra energy. And what I would say is, so they are calmer in class. I don't think this sentence is needed, because you've saying they're calmer in class, this is what we call tautological or redundant. You've already said they're calmer in class. You don't need another sentence to explain that when they have pent-up energy, they're fidgety, because you've already stated that idea here. So I've greatly shortened this particular paragraph, but there's a lot of areas where, and here you're getting into the focus bit. So the writer's getting into the focus bit, because if we go back to the topic sentence, right, this paragraph is supposed to be addressing, and I would change the order, because they first talk about healthy brain activity. Right? They talk about the brain activity first, and then they get into this idea of focus. So after this quotation, analysis is needed to explain, right, why this quotation is here. Not only does PE enable the development of healthy brain activity, it also increases mental focus, right? Kind of transitioning so your reader knows what's happening. It might feel repetitious. It is repetitious, but that's good repetition. Hey, reader, remember this topic sentence you read a little while ago and probably forgot about by the time you get to this part in the paragraph? I'm reminding you, jogging the reader's memory. And then I would go on to, the problem here is that there's evidence for this paragraph ultimately has two subclaims, one about the healthy brain activity and the second about the mental focus. There's evidence for the healthy brain activity, but there's no evidence for the increased mental focus. So evidence would be needed for that. Okay, that is all I'm going to do, because all of my notes would be kind of similar for the rest of the paragraphs. A note here, you never say in conclusion, because we know it's your conclusion. You've even given us the topic sentence, or the section. I'm going to change the color because it's wrong. And I still want to get rid of all of these spaces, which are driving me crazy. There's tick marks here, right? So this needs a good polish, as well as all of the other stuff that I talked about. In terms of the references page, remember the references page, and I know I probably bumped this down from stuff I was writing and taking away, but so it's probably my fault rather than the writer's. But the references page always gets started on a new page. I always wait to do I always put in when I write, anytime I include a reference, I'll add it to my references page, but I don't ever put the references page at the top of a new page until I've completely finished my writing, because it's going to go all over the place as I add, delete, take away. So but I do add as I go. And the thing about this references page is you don't need this boldface. It just gets regular text, like regular plain text. The first thing I'm seeing is that they're not alphabetized. Like you've got U, C, G, and then U, N, C. So they need to be reordered for to be alphabetized. The hanging indentations are great. This is the hanging indentation, this kind of look here, and this is for the reader, right? So the reader can go through very quickly and see the sources. There is a font difference here that the writer would want to change that to Times New Roman, and then you can take away that and then make it black, and then it's a little bit prettier. But that is everything I'm going to do for this video lecture to give you an idea of revision and process, and also my response to kind of what is going through my brain as I'm grading. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this and send this back to the student who so generously offered it as an example. So I thank them for doing that, and they're going to get all this additional feedback. They're getting much more than other people got in feedback. But I would expect, even though I didn't provide feedback on the last two body paragraphs or the conclusion, that all of the feedback that I've provided can be applied to those last two paragraphs. And that's the cognitive work that is revision, is that these were the notes I was given. I'm not just going to address them in the areas where they were addressed. I'm going to then apply those notes to places where the notes were not given. That is one of the things people look for in revision. That's independent learning, and it's execution of critical thinking skills. So otherwise, this is it for this video lecture. I will be catching up on grading this weekend. If you have any questions, let me know. But other than that, I will talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.